5,000 years ago, in a land between two rivers, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in human history, people stopped wandering. They built walls, not just to keep enemies out, but to keep civilization in. The Sumerians didn't just invent cities. They invented the very idea of invention itself. Before them, human progress crawled at the pace of geological time. After them, everything changed. In the southern marshlands of what we now call Iraq, these people created writing, not to tell stories at first, but to count sheep. They measured time, divided the circle into 360 degrees, and gave us the 60-minute hour. They fermented the first beer, baked the first bread in ovens, and sailed the first boats with sails. But here's what makes them truly fascinating. The Sumerians appeared in history fully formed, like actors walking onto an empty stage. No one knows where they came from. Their language connects to no other. They called themselves the Black-Headed People, and their land Ki-en-Gir. Yet these names explain nothing about their origins. What they left behind defies easy explanation. Clay tablets describe kings who ruled for thousands of years. Their gods descended from the stars. Their myths speak of global floods, of humans created from clay, of knowledge gifted by mysterious beings who emerged from the Persian Gulf. The Sumerians matter because every time you write a word, check the time, or argue in court, you're using something they started. Their fingerprints rest on the foundations of our world, invisible but everywhere. Mesopotamia means between rivers in Greek. But the Greeks came thousands of years after the real story began. To understand the Sumerians, you must first understand their land, because in southern Mesopotamia, the land itself was both paradise and prison. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers begin their journey in the mountains of modern Turkey. By the time they reach southern Iraq, they've traveled over 1,000 miles, carrying billions of tons of silt. This silt, microscopic fragments of mountain rock, would become the foundation of civilization. Every spring, snowmelt from the Taurus and Zagros mountains swelled these rivers. The floods came with violence. Unlike the gentle, predictable flooding of the Nile, Mesopotamian floods arrived like invading armies, sudden, devastating, transformative. The Sumerians had a word, A'abba. It meant flood, but also meant father of the waters. This wasn't contradiction. It was understanding. The same force that destroyed also created. When floodwaters receded, they left behind something precious. Fresh soil, rich with nutrients, deposited in layers year after year. Over millennia, this process built the land itself. Southern Mesopotamia is entirely made of flood deposits. Dig down 100 feet and you'll find nothing but layer upon layer of ancient river mud. This created a bizarre landscape. No stones existed here, not even pebbles. No metal ores hid beneath the surface. No forests grew in this flat expanse. The only building material was mud. The only fuel was reeds. And the only natural resource was human ingenuity. Yet this apparent wasteland could feed more people per square mile than anywhere else on Earth, if you could control the water. Water control required something humanity had never attempted before. It required hundreds of people working together, digging channels that stretched for miles. It required planning that extended beyond a single growing season. It required leaders who could organize labor, resolve disputes, and maintain infrastructure. In other words, water control required civilization. The first Sumerian farmers didn't choose this land because it was easy. They chose it because it was possible. Around 5,500 BC, small groups began settling along the riverbanks. They dug simple ditches to guide floodwater to their fields. These early settlements, places archaeologists call Tel el-Weli and Chogamami, barely qualified as villages. A few dozen mud brick houses clustered together, small shrines made of reeds and mud, granaries no bigger than modern garden sheds. But something was different here. These people buried their dead with beads made from shells that came from the Persian Gulf, hundreds of miles away. They painted their pottery with designs that appeared nowhere else. They spoke a language that linguists still can't connect to any other human tongue. They called themselves Ugsagiga, the black-headed people. Why black-headed? Some scholars think it described their hair color, distinguishing them from red-haired or blonde neighbors. Others believe it had religious significance, black being the color of fertility and rich soil. The truth is, we don't know. This becomes a pattern with the Sumerians. The more we learn, the more questions emerge. By 4500 BC, these villages had grown into something unprecedented. Eridu, which Sumerians considered the first city in the world, covered nearly 10 hectares. Its temple, rebuilt on the same spot 17 times over 2,000 years, rose above the marshlands like an artificial mountain. Eridu sat at the edge of a vast marshland that stretched to the Persian Gulf. These marshes, the same ones that still exist in southern Iraq, provided everything the early Sumerians needed: reeds for building, fish for protein, waterfowl for feast days. The marshes also provided protection. Enemy armies couldn't march through waist-deep water and dense reed beds. The Sumerians developed a unique relationship with their environment. They didn't fight nature. They negotiated with it. When floods came, they channeled the water. When drought struck, they had reserves stored in artificial reservoirs. When salt accumulated in their fields, a constant problem in irrigated land, they developed crop rotation systems and grew salt-tolerant barley. This negotiation with nature shaped their entire worldview. Sumerian gods weren't distant, abstract beings. They were forces of nature given personality: flood and drought, fertility and death, order and chaos. Humans existed to serve these gods, just as they served the land itself. The Sumerian creation myth, inscribed on tablets from the 3rd millennium BC, tells of a time before time. Fresh water, called Absu, mingled with salt water, called Tiamat. From their union came mud, and from mud came everything else. This wasn't abstract philosophy. Anyone living in southern Mesopotamia could see this creation happening every year. River water met seawater in the marshes. Their mixing created vast mudflats. Life emerged from this mud: reeds, fish, birds, and eventually, humans. The land shaped more than their mythology. It shaped their technology. Without wood or stone, Sumerians became master workers of clay. They discovered that different mixtures of mud, straw, and water produced different results. Add more straw, and bricks became lighter but less durable. Add sand, and they could withstand higher temperatures. They learned to bake bricks in kilns, creating building materials as hard as stone. They invented the arch, a shape that allowed mud bricks to span wide spaces without collapsing. They developed bitumen waterproofing, using natural tar that seeped from the ground to seal their boats and line their canals. Every innovation solved a problem created by their environment. No trees for roof beams. Invent the dome. No stone for grinding grain. Import it from hundreds of miles away, creating trade networks that would eventually span continents. Trade became the lifeblood of Sumerian cities. They had grain, massive surpluses of it. A single field could produce 30 times the grain needed to replant it. This surplus became currency, exchanged for everything they lacked. Sumerian merchants traveled impossible distances. They sailed to Bahrain for pearls, to Oman for copper, to the Indus Valley for carnelian beads. They drove donkey caravans to Lebanon for cedar wood, to Anatolia for obsidian, to Afghanistan for lapis lazuli. These trade routes required something revolutionary: standardization. Merchants from different cities needed to agree on weights, measures, and values. This led to the world's first standardized measurement systems. The Sumerians based their measurements on the human body, practical for travelers. A finger was the width of a finger. A foot was the length of a foot. A cubit was the distance from elbow to fingertip. But they standardized these measurements, creating official measuring rods kept in temples. They divided the day into 12 double hours. What we call hours today come from halving these. They divided the circle into 360 degrees because 360 divides evenly by many numbers, making calculations easier without calculators. Mathematics emerged from practical needs. How much seed for a field this size? How many workers to dig a canal this long? How much grain to feed a city through winter? But Sumerian mathematics went beyond the practical. Tablets from 2000 BC show them calculating square roots and cubic volumes. They understood the Pythagorean theorem 1500 years before Pythagoras was born. They created multiplication tables that went up to 1800. Why such advanced mathematics? The answer might lie in their architecture. Sumerian temples, called ziggurats, were artificial mountains rising from the flat plains. Building them required precise calculations, angles, volumes, weight distribution. The great ziggurat of built around 2100 BC, stood 70 feet tall. Its base measured 200 feet by 150 feet. 3 massive staircases, each with 100 steps, converged at a temple on top. The entire structure contained millions of mud bricks, each one made by hand, dried in the sun, and carried into place. Building projects like this required organization beyond anything humanity had attempted. Workers needed food and water. Bricks needed to be produced on schedule. Architects needed to coordinate with engineers, who coordinated with foremen, who coordinated with workers. This coordination required writing --, and so the Sumerians invented it. The land between rivers had forced an evolution. Simple farmers became complex societies. Villages became cities. And humans discovered they could reshape their world, if they could first reshape themselves. Writing didn't begin with poetry or prayers. It began with sheep. Around 3500 BC, in the Sumerian city of Uruk, temple administrators faced a problem. The temple owned thousands of animals, sheep, goats, cattle. Different shepherds took different flocks to different pastures. When they returned, disputes arose. How many animals did each shepherd take? How many came back? Who owed what to whom? Memory wasn't enough. The human brain struggles to track more than about 150 relationships, what anthropologists call Dunbar's number. Uruk had tens of thousands of residents. The temple's economic network involved thousands of transactions daily. Someone, we'll never know who, created a solution. They took a lump of wet clay, no bigger than a child's palm. They pressed the end of a reed into it, making wedge-shaped marks. Each mark meant something. A circle with a cross meant sheep. A semicircle meant a container of grain. Lines meant numbers. This wasn't writing as we understand it. These marks, what scholars call proto-cuneiform, were memory aids, like knots tied in string or notches carved in wood, but more sophisticated. They recorded things, not thoughts, objects, not ideas. The earliest tablets are shopping lists and receipts. 29 sheep received, 30 jars of beer delivered, 5 workers, 3 days, canal maintenance. But something remarkable happened over the next few centuries. These simple marks evolved. Scribes discovered they could combine symbols to create new meanings. The symbol for mouth plus the symbol for food meant to eat. The symbol for mouth plus the symbol for water meant to drink. Then came the breakthrough that created true writing, the rebus principle. Sumerian scribes realized that symbols could represent sounds, not just objects. The Sumerian word for arrow was ti. The word for life was also ti. So the symbol for arrow could also mean life. Context determined which meaning applied. This opened infinite possibilities. Suddenly, scribes could write abstract concepts: love, justice, fear, hope, things you couldn't draw pictures of. They could write names of people and places. They could record not just what happened, but why it happened and how people felt about it. By 2900 BC, Sumerian writing, now called cuneiform, from the Latin for wedge-shaped, had become a complete system. It used about 600 common signs, though the total number of possible signs exceeded 2,000. Learning to read and write took years of study. Scribal schools, called tablet houses, appeared in every major city. Students, mostly sons of wealthy families, began training around age 7. They spent years copying the same texts over and over. First, simple signs, practice tablets covered with the same wedge repeated hundreds of times. Then word lists, names of fish, names of birds, names of professions. then proverbs and model contracts. Finally, literature and mathematics. We know about scribal education because students kept their practice tablets. Thousands survive, complete with errors and corrections. One tablet from around 2000 BC preserves a student's complaint. My teacher said my handwriting is bad. He beat me. The monitor said I talked without permission. He beat me. The gatekeeper said I went out without permission. He beat me. Education was harsh, but literacy brought power. Scribes became the nervous system of Sumerian civilization. They recorded laws, managed taxes, drafted contracts, and wrote letters. Without scribes, the complex economy of a Sumerian city would collapse. Writing transformed how humans thought. Before writing, knowledge lived only in memory. Stories changed with each telling. Laws bent to match circumstances. History merged with myth. Writing created permanence. A contract written on clay lasted longer than the people who signed it. Laws carved in stone couldn't be denied or forgotten. Stories became fixed, creating literature. The first author whose name we know was a Sumerian, Inanna, high priestess of the moon god in around 2300 BC, wrote hymns that survive on dozens of tablets. She wrote in the first person, describing her emotions, her devotion, her exile and return. Her words, pressed into clay 4,300 years ago, still speak. I am Inanna, the high priestess. I am the keeper of the cosmic powers. In the sanctuary, I pour out my heart like water. Writing also created bureaucracy. The Sumerians documented everything. We have tablets recording the daily rations given to workers building a temple in 2100 BC. Each worker received 2 liters of barley, 1 liter of beer, and 2 small fish. Skilled workers got double rations. Women received the same as men for the same work, unusual in the ancient world. These records reveal the complexity of Sumerian society. One archive from the city of Dreham contains 20,000 tablets documenting livestock deliveries over just 40 years. The detail is staggering. Every animal is counted, its origin recorded, its destination noted, its purpose specified. Writing made law possible. Before writing, justice depended on memory and tradition. With writing, laws could be standardized, publicized, and enforced uniformly. The first law code we know of comes from the Sumerian king Ur-Nammu, around 2100 BC. Unlike later codes that focused on punishment, Ur-Nammu's laws emphasized compensation. If you broke someone's bone, you paid them 10 shekels of silver. If you cut off someone's nose, you paid them 2/3 of a mina, about 40 shekels. The code also protected the vulnerable. Orphans and widows couldn't be exploited by the wealthy. A powerful man couldn't take property from a poor man without fair payment. These weren't just ideals, they were enforced laws, written down, publicly displayed. Writing revolutionized trade. Merchants could send letters ahead of their caravans, arranging deals before they arrived. They could create contracts that specified exact terms, quantity, quality, delivery date, penalties for breach. One tablet from around 2000 BC records a merchant's complaint to his supplier. The copper you sent is bad. I have been treated with contempt. You said, take it or leave it. Who am I that you treat me with such contempt? I have sent messengers, gentlemen like ourselves, to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back empty-handed. This complaint, written by a merchant named Nani to a supplier named Inanna, is the world's first recorded customer service complaint. Inanna kept it, along with many other complaint tablets found in his house in Ur. Perhaps he collected them as curiosities, or maybe as evidence in legal disputes. Writing enabled long-distance communication. Kings could govern territories they'd never visit. Generals could coordinate armies separated by hundreds of miles. Families could maintain connections across vast distances. We have personal letters from 4,000 years ago that feel remarkably modern. A mother writes to her son studying in another city. The clothes you sent are beautiful, but you are getting thin. Are you not eating properly? Come home for the festival. Your father misses you, though he won't admit it. Writing preserved knowledge across generations. Mathematical discoveries didn't die with their discoverers. Agricultural techniques could be recorded and improved. Medical treatments could be standardized and tested. Sumerian medical texts, dating from around 2100 BC, describe surgical procedures in detail. One tablet instructs how to treat a broken bone. Clean the wound with beer. Apply a poultice of crushed herbs mixed with turtle shell powder. Bind with linen soaked in honey and animal fat. Change the dressing every 3 days. While some treatments seem strange to modern medicine, turtle shell powder, for instance, others show sophisticated understanding. Beer contains alcohol, which disinfects. Honey has antibacterial properties. Regular dressing changes prevent infection. Writing transformed religion. Prayers became standardized liturgies. Myths became sacred texts. Religious knowledge became codified, creating theology. The Sumerians wrote down their creation myths, their flood stories, their tales of gods and heroes. These stories influenced every culture that followed. The biblical flood narrative echoes the Sumerian flood myth. The Garden of Eden parallels the Sumerian paradise of Dilmun. But perhaps writing's greatest gift was memory itself. The Sumerians could speak to the future. They knew they could. Foundation deposits, tablets buried in temple foundations, often addressed future discoverers. Whoever you are who finds this tablet, know that I, Gudea, governor of Lagash, built this temple for Ningirsu. I built it properly, according to the old plans. May the god bless you as he blessed me. They were right to trust in writing's permanence. Paper decays, parchment burns, but clay tablets baked in fire become nearly indestructible. When Sumerian cities burned, whether from war or accident, their libraries were preserved, not destroyed. Fire turned unbaked tablets into permanent records. Today, we have more written material from ancient Sumer than from any other early civilization. Over 500,000 tablets have been excavated. Millions more likely remain buried. Each year, archaeologists find more. Most haven't been translated. They sit in museum storage rooms, waiting. Each one is a message from the dawn of civilization, a voice speaking across 5,000 years. The invention of writing marked humanity's transition from prehistory to history. Before writing, we can only guess at what people thought and felt. After writing, they tell us themselves. The Sumerians gave us this gift, the ability to transmit complex thoughts across space and time. Every book, every email, every text message traces back to those first marks pressed into clay in ancient Uruk. They invented writing to count sheep, and accidentally invented immortality. The Sumerians lived in a universe crowded with gods, not distant, abstract deities, but beings who ate, drank, married, divorced, and schemed against each other like characters in a vast cosmic soap opera. These gods didn't create humans out of love. They created them as workers. According to Sumerian mythology, before humans existed, younger gods did all the labor. They dug canals, maintained irrigation systems, and grew food for the elder gods. After thousands of years, they revolted. The god Enlil wanted to destroy them, but Enki, the clever god of wisdom, proposed a solution: create a new species to do the work. So the gods mixed clay with the blood of a sacrificed god, creating humans. We were, from the beginning, divine mud animated by divine blood, created for divine convenience. This origin story explained why humans had to work. It was literally what we were made for. The Sumerian pantheon contained hundreds of gods, but 3 stood supreme and ruled the heavens, distant and largely inactive. Enlil commanded the earth and air, decreeing fates and sending floods. Enki governed the fresh waters beneath the earth, the source of wisdom and magic. Each city had its own patron deity who lived in the city's main temple. This wasn't symbolic. Sumerians believed their gods physically resided in their temples, inhabiting statues that were fed, clothed, and entertained daily. The daily care of the gods followed elaborate rituals. Each morning, priests would wake the god's statue with songs. They'd wash it, dress it in fresh clothes, apply makeup and perfume. Meals were presented 4 times daily: bread, beer, roasted meat, fruits. The god consumed the spiritual essence of the food, Then priests ate the physical remains. Temple complexes were cities within cities. The temple of Inanna in Uruk employed thousands of people: priests, scribes, craftsmen, farmers, shepherds, brewers, bakers, musicians, dancers. The temple owned vast estates, entire villages, fishing fleets, and trading expeditions. Temples functioned as banks, lending grain and silver at interest. They were manufacturing centers, producing textiles and processed foods. They were schools where scribes learned writing and priests learned rituals. They were courts where disputes were settled and contracts witnessed. The relationship between humans and gods was contractual. Humans provided service and offerings. Gods provided protection and prosperity. When cities suffered from flood, drought, or enemy attack, it meant the gods were angry. The solution was more offerings, more rituals, more temples. But Sumerian gods weren't moral exemplars. They lied, stole, committed adultery, and murdered each other. The goddess Inanna, patron of love and war, was particularly complex. Beautiful and terrible, generous and vindictive, she embodied contradictions that Sumerians saw in life itself. One myth tells how Inanna got Enki drunk and tricked him into giving her the me, divine powers that controlled civilization. These included writing, law, music, crafts, and even concepts like truth and deceit. When Enki sobered up, he sent sea monsters to retrieve them, but Inanna escaped to her city of Uruk, bringing civilization with her. The most famous Sumerian myth is Inanna's descent to the underworld. She decided to visit her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. At each of 7 gates, she had to remove an article of clothing or jewelry. By the 7th gate, she was naked and powerless. Ereshkigal killed her and hung her corpse on a hook. For 3 days, Inanna remained dead. The world above began to die with her. No births, no growth, no desire. Finally, Enki created 2 sexless beings from the dirt under his fingernails and sent them to the underworld with the water and food of life. They revived Inanna, but she could only leave if someone took her place. When Inanna returned to Earth, she found her husband Dumuzi sitting on her throne, showing no signs of mourning. Furious, she condemned him to take her place in the underworld. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld, his sister taking his place for the other half. This myth explained the seasons. When Dumuzi was underground, the earth was barren. When he returned, fertility returned. But it also explored deeper themes: the price of power, the inevitability of death, the complexity of love and betrayal. The Sumerians had a dark view of the afterlife. The dead, regardless of how they lived, went to Irkalla, a shadowy underworld where they existed as gloomy spirits eating dust and drinking muddy water. The only comfort came from offerings left by living relatives, food, drink, and prayers that briefly brightened their eternal gloom. This belief system shaped Sumerian behavior. Since the afterlife offered no rewards, life itself became precious. The Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest known literary work, wrestles with this reality. Gilgamesh was probably a real king of Uruk around 2700 BC, but legends transformed him into a demigod, 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. The epic begins with Gilgamesh oppressing his people. The gods create Enkidu, a wild man, to challenge him. After fighting, they become best friends and share adventures. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is devastated. He realizes that he too will die and embarks on a quest for immortality. He travels to the end of the world to find Utnapishtim, the only human granted eternal life, the survivor of the Great Flood. Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the flood story. The gods decided to destroy humanity because people had become too noisy. Enki warned Utnapishtim to build a boat and save representatives of all living things. After the flood, the gods regretted their decision and granted Utnapishtim immortality, but this was a one-time exception. Utnapishtim challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 7 days. If he can't defeat sleep, how can he defeat death? Gilgamesh fails immediately. As consolation, Utnapishtim tells him about a plant that grants youth. Gilgamesh retrieves it from the ocean floor, but a snake steals it while he bathes. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk empty-handed but transformed. He realizes immortality comes not from living forever, but from what we build and how we're remembered. The epic ends with him showing someone the walls of Uruk, his true monument. This story, first written down around 2100 BC, contains themes that resonate today: friendship, loss, the search for meaning, the acceptance of mortality. It influenced literature across the ancient world. Elements appear in Homer's epics, in the Bible, in the stories of cultures that had no direct contact with Mesopotamia. Sumerian religious practices included festivals that temporarily inverted social order. During the New Year festival, a slave would be chosen to be king for several days. He'd wear royal robes, issue commands, enjoy the king's privileges. At the festival's end, he'd be stripped of power and sometimes killed. This ritual served multiple purposes. It released social tensions by allowing temporary role reversal. It reinforced hierarchy by showing its temporary suspension as chaotic. It renewed the real king's power by having him reconquer it. The sacred marriage ritual was equally complex. Each year, the king would ceremonially marry the goddess Inanna, represented by her high priestess. This union ensured fertility for the coming year, for fields, flocks, and families. The ceremony included a public procession, ritual bathing, exchange of gifts, and a wedding feast. What happened in the wedding chamber remains debated. Some scholars believe it was symbolic. Others point to explicit hymns describing physical consummation. The truth probably varied by city and period. Sumerian religion wasn't separate from daily life. It permeated everything. Business contracts invoked gods as witnesses. Medical treatments combined practical remedies with incantations. Agricultural calendars were religious documents, marking when to plant by divine festivals. Personal devotion took many forms. People wore amulets depicting their personal god. They commissioned votive statues to stand in temples, perpetually praying on their behalf. These statues, with their huge eyes and clasped hands, are among the most recognizable Sumerian artifacts. The Sumerians believed in personal gods, minor deities who protected individuals and families. If you prospered, your personal god was strong. If you suffered, your god had abandoned you, usually because of some offense. Texts survive of people desperately trying to determine what they'd done wrong. One particularly moving prayer comes from around 2000 BC. My God, I did not know my sin, yet you punish me. I did not know my transgression, yet you are angry. My goddess, mother who bore me, tell me my fault. How long will you turn your face from me? Dreams were messages from gods. Dream interpreters were important professionals, consulted before major decisions. Gudea, governor of Lagash, around 2100 BC, recorded a dream where the god Ningirsu appeared as a giant with wings, standing between heaven and earth, commanding him to build a temple. The temple he built still partially stands today. Divination took many forms. Priests examined sheep livers, looking for unusual marks that indicated divine will. They watched oil patterns on water, flight patterns of birds, shapes of smoke from incense. They developed elaborate manuals correlating signs with meanings, creating a science of divination. Magic and medicine intertwined. Illness was caused by demons, angry ghosts, or divine punishment. Treatment required identifying the supernatural cause and addressing it. Through offerings, incantations, or magical rituals, practical treatments, herbs, surgery, dietary changes, worked by giving the supernatural cure a physical pathway. The Sumerians left us a prayer that transcends its specific context. May the gods grant you life for many days. May they add years of joy to your years of life. May you live in peace with your wife and children. May your personal God walk beside you. May your heart rejoice. Their gods are long forgotten, their temples ruined, but their hopes remain utterly human. Uruk was the first megacity. By 3100 BC, it housed 50,000 people within its 6-mile wall, more humans in one place than had ever gathered before. To understand its scale, consider that most of humanity still lived in groups of fewer than 150 people. Uruk was 300 times larger. Walking through Uruk's streets in its prime would have overwhelmed the senses. The smell of bread baking in hundreds of ovens mixed with incense from temples. The sound of copper hammers in workshops competed with merchants hawking goods in Sumerian, Akkadian, and languages from distant lands. Narrow alleys opened suddenly into vast courtyards where thousands gathered for religious festivals. The city's heart was the Inanna district, a sacred complex covering 32 acres. Its temples rose like artificial mountains, their walls covered in millions of colored clay cones pressed into geometric patterns. These cone mosaics, glittering in the sun, could be seen from miles away. Cities like Uruk didn't grow gradually. They exploded into existence. The Uruk period, from 4000 to 3100 BC, saw southern Mesopotamia transform from scattered villages to urban civilization. This wasn't evolution, it was revolution. What triggered this urban explosion? The answer lies in a feedback loop of innovation. Irrigation allowed larger populations. Larger populations required organization. Organization enabled specialization. Specialization drove innovation. Innovation increased productivity. Higher productivity supported even larger populations. Each Sumerian city-state, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Kish, Nippur, functioned as an independent nation. They had their own kings, armies, laws, and patron deities. They fought constantly over water rights, trade routes, and honor. Yet they shared language, culture, and religion. They were one civilization divided into competing parts. The earliest form of government was temple-centered. The En, high priest or priestess, ruled as the god's representative. But as cities grew and conflicts intensified, military leaders gained power. The Lugal, literally big man, emerged as war chief, eventually becoming king. The tension between religious and military authority defined Sumerian politics. Kings needed priests to legitimize their rule. Priests needed kings to protect temple wealth. This uneasy partnership created the world's first complex governments. Around 2900 BC, what archaeologists call the early dynastic period began. Kings became hereditary rulers rather than elected war leaders. Royal dynasties emerged, each claiming divine approval. The Sumerian king list, compiled around 2100 BC, traces these dynasties back to when kingship descended from heaven. The king list makes extraordinary claims. Before the flood, it says, kings ruled for thousands of years. Alulim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. Enmenlu-Ana ruled for 43,200 years. After the flood, reigns became shorter but still impossibly long. Gilgamesh allegedly ruled for 126 years. These numbers likely have symbolic rather than literal meaning. They establish antiquity and legitimacy. They connect historical kings to mythical ancestors. They assert that kingship itself is ancient and divinely ordained. Real history emerges more clearly around 2700 BC. The royal cemetery of Ur, excavated in the 1920s, revealed tombs of staggering wealth and disturbing practices. Queen Puabi's tomb contained her body adorned with pounds of gold jewelry, elaborate headdresses, necklaces of gold and lapis lazuli, rings on every finger. But she wasn't alone. 23 attendants were buried with her. Soldiers, musicians, servants, all apparently killed to serve their queen in the afterlife. They showed no signs of violence. Small cups near their bodies suggest poison, probably taken voluntarily. This practice of retainer sacrifice appears unique to this period. Earlier and later Sumerian burials don't include human sacrifices. Perhaps it reflected a brief period when kings claimed such divine status that serving them after death was considered an honor. The wealth in these tombs reveals extensive trade networks. Lapis lazuli came from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, cedar wood from Lebanon. Sumerian merchants traveled thousands of miles, crossing deserts and mountains, sailing unknown seas. Trade required standardization and trust. Cylinder seals, small carved stones rolled across clay to leave an impression, served as signatures. Each merchant, official, and scribe had a unique seal. A sealed tablet or jar couldn't be opened without breaking the seal, ensuring authenticity. These seals are miniature artworks. Despite being often less than an inch tall, they depict elaborate scenes: gods battling monsters, heroes taming lions, ritual banquets, mythological narratives. The skill required to carve such detail in hard stone, in reverse so it would print correctly, astounds modern craftsmen. City-states competed through monument building. Each king tried to build larger temples, higher walls, grander palaces than his rivals. Inscriptions boasted of these achievements. I, Ur-Nansha, king of Lagash, built the temple of Ningirsu. I dug the canal to the sea. I built the wall of Lagash, which rises like a mountain. Wars between cities were constant but limited. They fought over specific grievances: water rights, stolen property, border disputes. Armies were small, perhaps a few thousand soldiers. Battles occurred in open fields between cities. Victory meant imposing tribute, not destroying the enemy. The stele of vultures, carved around 2450 BC, depicts one such war. Inanna of Lagash defeated Umma in a dispute over fertile fields. The stele shows Inanna leading a phalanx of soldiers, their shields locked, spears projecting like a hedgehog. Another panel shows vultures carrying away the heads of dead enemies, hence the monument's modern name. Around 2334 BC, the pattern of limited warfare between city-states ended. Sargon of Akkad, whose name means legitimate king, suggesting he wasn't, conquered all of Sumer. He wasn't Sumerian but Akkadian, a Semitic people who had lived alongside Sumerians for centuries. Sargon's origin story reads like mythology. His mother, a priestess, gave birth in secret and set him adrift in a basket on the river. A gardener found and raised him. He became cupbearer to the king of Kish, then overthrew him and began his conquests. Sargon created the world's first multi-ethnic empire. He claimed to rule from the Upper Sea to the Lower Sea, from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. His empire included Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, Hurrians, and Elamites. To control this diversity, Sargon innovated. He appointed his daughters as high priestesses in major temples, merging religious and political authority. He standardized weights and measures across the empire. He created the first standing army, 5,400 soldiers who ate bread before him daily. But Sargon's most lasting innovation was cultural synthesis. Rather than suppress Sumerian culture, he absorbed it. Akkadian scribes learned cuneiform. Akkadian kings took Sumerian throne names. Sumerian gods received Akkadian names but kept their roles. Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, went further. He declared himself a god, the first Mesopotamian king to claim divinity while alive. His victory stele shows him wearing the horned helmet of divinity, trampling enemies while ascending a mountain. Stars shine above him. He has literally reached toward heaven. The Akkadian Empire lasted less than 2 centuries. Around 2150 BC, it collapsed suddenly. The cause remains debated. Invasion by mountain peoples called Gutians, internal rebellion, or climate change. Recent evidence suggests a severe drought lasting decades, causing agricultural collapse and mass migration. The Gutians, described by Sumerians as knowing no inhibition, with human instinct but canine intelligence, controlled Mesopotamia briefly. But Sumerian culture survived in the south. Around 2100 BC, Ur-Nammu of Ur expelled the Gutians and established the third dynasty of Ur, the last flowering of Sumerian civilization. Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi created a renaissance. They rebuilt temples, constructed massive ziggurats, and codified laws. They standardized everything: calendar, measurements, curriculum in schools, even the size of bricks. The Ur Third Period, as historians call it, produced an explosion of written records. Over 100,000 tablets survive from these 5 decades, more than from the previous 1,000 years combined. They document everything: worker rations, tax receipts, court proceedings, diplomatic letters, school exercises. One archive from the city of Dreum records every animal brought for sacrifice over 40 years. We know that on the 15th day of the 4th month of Shulgi's 37th year, 42 sheep, 17 goats, and 3 cattle arrived from the governor of Nippur. This obsessive record-keeping gives us an almost day-by-day account of Sumerian life. But this bureaucratic efficiency couldn't save them. Around 2000 BC, the Ur-3 state collapsed. Amorites from the west and Elamites from the east invaded. The last king of Ur, Ibisin, was captured and taken to Elam in chains. A lamentation written soon after captures the devastation. The city, which once knew no hunger, now hungers. The city, which once knew no thirst, now thirsts. In Ur, the shrine of abundance, there is now scarcity. Its people wander like lost sheep. With Ur's fall, Sumerian political independence ended forever. But Sumerian culture had already transformed the world. Every subsequent Mesopotamian civilization, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, built on Sumerian foundations. The Sumerians invented the city and discovered its problems: overcrowding, pollution, crime, inequality, political corruption, all appear in Sumerian texts. They also discovered the city's power to concentrate human creativity, accelerate innovation, and build something greater than any individual could imagine. The Sumerians didn't just build civilization, they invented the tools to build it. Every complex society that followed used technologies and systems the Sumerians created. They gave us the wheel, the plow, the sailboat, but also bureaucracy, schools, and law courts. The wheel seems obvious in hindsight, but for most of human history, people moved things by carrying, dragging, or rolling them on logs. The wheel, a disc rotating on an axle, required a conceptual leap. The Sumerians made that leap around 3500 BC. The first wheels weren't for transportation. They were potter's wheels, horizontal discs that spun to shape clay vessels. This innovation revolutionized pottery production. A skilled potter could make dozens of identical vessels daily, rather than slowly hand-building each one. Transportation wheels appeared slightly later. Early Sumerian wheels were solid wooden discs, 3 planks joined together and cut into a circle. They were heavy, creaky, and slow, but they transformed everything. A human can carry about 40 pounds comfortably over long distances. A donkey can carry about 130 pounds, but a donkey pulling a wheeled cart can move 500 pounds. The wheel multiplied carrying capacity by a factor of 4. Sumerian war chariots appeared around 2600 BC. These weren't the light, fast chariots of later periods. They were heavy, 4-wheeled wagons pulled by donkeys or oxen. The standard of Ur, a decorated box from around 2600 BC, shows these vehicles: solid wheels, high sides, carrying a driver and a warrior with javelins. The plough was equally revolutionary. Before the plough, farmers prepared fields with digging sticks or hoes, back-breaking work that limited farm size. The Sumerian plough, pulled by oxen, could prepare a field in hours that would take days by hand. Sumerian ploughs were sophisticated instruments. They included a seed drill, a tube that dropped seeds at regular intervals as the plough moved. This ensured even planting and optimal spacing. A farmer's almanac from around 1700 BC gives detailed instructions. When you plough, keep your eye on the man who puts in the barley seed. Let him drop the grain uniformly, 2 fingers deep. Use up 1 shekel of barley for each gariku of land. Irrigation was the foundation of Sumerian agriculture. Their canal systems were engineering marvels. Main canals, wide enough for boats, branched into smaller channels, then into field ditches. Sluice gates controlled water flow. Levees protected fields from floods. Maintaining these systems required constant work. Silt accumulated, requiring annual dredging. Reed growth clogged channels. Salt build-up poisoned fields, a problem that eventually contributed to Sumerian decline. Every citizen owed corvée labor, mandatory work on public projects. Tablets record work gangs' assignments. 30 men, 5 days, canal cleaning, section from the date palm grove to the fisherman's village. Sailboats transformed trade. The first sails were probably square mats of woven reeds. They could only sail with the wind, but on Mesopotamian rivers, that was enough. The prevailing wind blew north, while the current flowed south. Boats sailed upriver and floated down. Sumerian boats ranged from small reed craft to massive cargo vessels. One tablet describes a boat carrying 300 tons of grain, enough to feed 1,000 people for a year. These ships connected cities along the rivers and ventured into the Persian Gulf, reaching Bahrain, Oman, and possibly India. Metallurgy advanced rapidly. Sumerians worked copper from the beginning, but around 3000 BC, they discovered bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that's much harder. Bronze tools stayed sharp longer. Bronze weapons gave military advantage, but tin was rare in Mesopotamia. It had to be imported from Afghanistan or Anatolia, creating long-distance trade networks. The tin road became as important as later Silk Roads. Control of tin sources meant economic and military power. Sumerian craftsmen achieved remarkable precision. The gold helmet of Meskel-Amdug, from around 2500 BC, was hammered from a single sheet of gold. It's shaped like a human head, complete with ears and elaborate hairstyling. The craftsmanship rivals anything produced today. Glassmaking began as an accident. Potters noticed that certain sands, when fired at high temperature, produced a glossy coating. By 2500 BC, Sumerians were making glass beads and small vessels. They couldn't make clear glass. Their glass was blue or green from copper impurities, but it was still revolutionary. Brewing was both art and science. Beer was the Sumerian national drink, safer than water, nutritious, and mildly alcoholic. They brewed at least 19 types of beer, from weak small beer for children to strong golden beer for special occasions. A hymn to Ninkasi, goddess of beer, doubles as a brewing recipe. You are the one who soaks the malt in a jar. You are the one who spreads the cooked mash on large reed mats. You are the one who holds with both hands the great sweet wort. Sumerians drank beer through straws to filter out floating barley husks. Drinking straws found in royal tombs were made of gold and lapis lazuli. Some of the most expensive objects in the ancient world were beer straws. Mathematics underpinned everything. Sumerians used a sexagesimal system, base 60 rather than our base 10. This seems awkward, but 60 has advantages. It divides evenly by many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. They created multiplication tables, calculated square and cube roots, and solved quadratic equations. A tablet from around 1800 BC gives the value of pi as 3 1/8, remarkably close to the true value. Sumerian students learned mathematics through practical problems. A granary has length 30, width 20, height 10. What is its volume? How much barley will it hold if one volume unit holds 6 units of barley? Time measurement came from astronomical observation. Sumerians tracked moon phases to create months. They noticed that 12 lunar months fell short of a solar year, so they added an extra month every few years. They divided day and night into 12 double hours each, the origin of our 24-hour day. Medicine combined practical knowledge with magical thinking. Sumerian doctors understood wound cleaning, bone setting, and surgical drainage. They had specialists: eye doctors, surgeons, veterinarians. Medical texts list hundreds of drugs made from plants, minerals, and animal parts. One prescription for eye infection reads: mix turtle shell, salt, and mustard plant. Wash the eye with beer. Apply the mixture. Cover with cloth soaked in oil. Schools produced the administrators who ran this complex civilization. The eduba, or tablet house, was a tough environment. Students arrived before dawn and stayed until sunset. They learned by endless repetition, copying signs, memorizing word lists, solving math problems. A student text captures the experience. When I got up early in the morning, I faced my mother and said, "Give me my lunch. I want to go to school." My mother gave me 2 rolls and I set out. In school, the monitor said, "Why are you late?" Afraid and with pounding heart, I entered before my teacher and bowed. Education was expensive and exclusive. Most students were sons of wealthy families, future scribes, priests, and administrators. But literacy brought power. A competent scribe could rise to become advisor to kings. Legal innovations protected both rich and poor. Courts required evidence, not just accusations. Witnesses testified under oath. Judges consulted written precedents. Contracts required multiple witnesses and official seals. A court case from around 2000 BC shows the system in action. A woman named Inanna accused 3 men of killing her husband. They denied it. The court sent them to the river ordeal. They had to jump in the river, and the river god would judge. All 3 survived, proving innocence. Then 2 witnesses testified they saw Inanna's slave kill the husband on her orders. She was executed. Banking emerged from temple storage. Temples held deposits, made loans, and transferred funds between accounts. Interest rates were standardized. 20% for silver loans, 33% for barley loans. Letters of credit allowed merchants to travel without carrying gold. Accounting systems tracked everything. Double-entry bookkeeping, often credited to Renaissance Italy, appears in Sumerian tablets. They balanced debits and credits, tracked inventory, calculated depreciation. One archive contains the complete books of a textile workshop for 40 years. Every thread accounted for. The Sumerians created systems so effective that we still use them. Our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles come from them. Our 7-day weeks derive from their lunar observations. Our legal principle that the accused is innocent until proven guilty originated in Sumerian courts. They showed that civilization isn't just buildings and monuments. It's systems and structures that allow thousands of strangers to cooperate. They invented the machinery of civilization, and 5,000 years later, the gears still turn. In ancient Sumer, women owned property, ran businesses, served as priestesses, and occasionally ruled cities. This wasn't universal equality, far from it. But Sumerian women had rights and roles that would disappear in later civilizations and not return for millennia. The world's first named author was a woman. Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, served as high priestess of the moon god Inanna in around 2300 BC. She didn't just perform rituals. She composed dozens of hymns that became part of the standard liturgy for centuries. Enheduanna wrote with striking personal voice. I, Enheduanna, the high priestess, I who once sat triumphant, I am now placed among the ruined. Even I was forced to flee the cloister. They made me fly like a swallow from the window. She's describing her exile during a rebellion against her father's empire. But she returned, reclaimed her position, and continued writing for decades. Her works were copied in scribal schools for over 1,000 years, longer than Shakespeare's plays have existed. Priestesses wielded enormous power. The priestess literally married the city's god in annual ceremonies. She controlled vast temple estates, supervised thousands of workers, and influenced political decisions. Kings appointed their daughters to these positions to cement political control. But most priestesses weren't royalty. The temples employed hundreds of women in various religious roles. The Naditu were celibate priestesses who couldn't marry or have children. In compensation, they could own property, run businesses, and adopt heirs. Contracts from the Naditu cloister in Sippar reveal these women as shrewd business people. They bought and sold real estate, loaned money at interest, invested in trading expeditions. One Naditu named Iltani owned taverns, date groves, and urban properties across 3 cities. Marriage in Sumer was a contract, not a sacrament. Both parties had rights and obligations spelled out in written agreements. A typical marriage contract from states, Warad Sin has married Iltani. If Warad Sin says to Iltani, "You are not my wife," he shall pay 1 mina of silver. If Iltani says to Warad Sin, "You are not my husband," she shall be thrown in the river. The penalties seem unequal, and they were. But notice that women could initiate divorce. In many later civilizations, this right wouldn't exist. Sumerian women could also demand specific grounds for divorce: abandonment, failure to provide support, or physical abuse. Women retained ownership of their dowries. If divorced or widowed, they took their property with them. They could also inherit from their parents. not equally with brothers, typically receiving a smaller share, but inheritance nonetheless. Tavern keeping was a female profession. Most tavern owners mentioned in texts are women. The law code of Hammurabi, based on earlier Sumerian law, regulates tavern keepers using feminine grammar throughout. These weren't just servers. They were entrepreneurs who brewed beer, provided lodging, and sometimes offered credit to customers. One tablet preserves a tavern keeper's complaint about customers who haven't paid their tabs. She lists their names and amounts owed, demanding the authorities collect her debts. The tablet's existence suggests her complaint was taken seriously. Women worked in textile production, Sumer's largest industry after agriculture. Massive workshops employed hundreds of women spinning thread, weaving cloth, and producing garments. These weren't sweatshops. Workers received regular rations, overtime pay, and maternity leave. Records from one textile workshop in Ur show remarkably modern labor practices. Pregnant women received extra food rations. New mothers got reduced work quotas for 6 months. Skilled workers earned double the basic wage. Workers could take days off for religious festivals and family emergencies. Some women achieved political power. Kubaba, a tavern keeper, somehow became king of Kish around 2500 BC. The Sumerian king list states she made firm the foundations of Kish and ruled for 100 years. Obviously symbolic, but indicating a long, successful reign. How did a tavern keeper become king? Later legends say she gave water to fishermen of the god Marduk, who rewarded her with kingship. More likely, she gained power during a crisis when traditional leadership failed. Her son and grandson also ruled, establishing a dynasty. Queen Puabi of Ur, who died around 2500 BC, was buried with treasures that dwarf most kings' tombs. Her headdress alone contained over 5 pounds of gold. Her cylinder seal identifies her as Enin, queen in her own right, not just king's wife. Women appeared in court as plaintiffs, defendants, and witnesses. One case from Nippur involves a woman named Ninshata, suing her brothers for denying her inheritance. She presented written evidence, her father's will specifying her share. The court ruled in her favor, ordering the brothers to pay her share plus a fine. Female scribes existed, though they were rare. Several tablets end with women's names as scribes. Princess Ninshatapada, daughter of King Shulgi, signed documents as Dubsar, scribe. Most female scribes worked in temples or palaces, handling correspondence between royal women. Personal letters between women survive. One mother writes to her daughter, "Why do you never write?" Even a slave girl would inquire about her mother's health. "Are you not my daughter?" Another letter, from a wife to her traveling merchant husband. "Since you left, the children have been driving me crazy. Your son refuses to go to school. Your daughter wants to become a priestess. Send money and advice, preferably more of the former." Women practiced medicine. A medical text mentions female physicians called Azu. They specialized in women's health and childbirth, but also treated general ailments. One tablet prescribes treatments, as the woman doctor of the palace prepared them. Midwifery was exclusively female. Midwives delivered babies, but also served as medical experts in legal cases involving pregnancy and childbirth. They testified about paternity, miscarriages, and infant health. Their testimony could determine inheritance rights and criminal penalties. Prostitution existed and was regulated. Temple prostitutes, called Nugig, served the goddess Inanna. They weren't outcasts. They participated in religious ceremonies and could own property. Some became wealthy enough to dedicate expensive votive offerings. Women's legal status varied by class. Free women had extensive rights. Slave women had none, being property themselves. Between them were various categories of dependent women: debt slaves, war captives, temple servants, each with different rights and restrictions. Rape was a crime, but the law viewed it as property damage. Raping a married woman was adultery, punishable by death. Raping a virgin required the rapist to pay her father and marry her. Raping a slave meant compensating her owner. The woman's consent or trauma rarely entered legal consideration. Women's clothing indicated status. Free women wore veils in public, not for modesty, but as a privilege. Slaves were forbidden to veil. A slave woman caught wearing a veil faced severe punishment. The veil marked respectability, not oppression. Goddess worship gave women religious authority. Inanna/Ishtar was the most powerful deity in many cities. Her festivals inverted normal social order. Women took men's roles, men dressed as women. These temporary inversions reinforced but also questioned gender hierarchies. Women participated in the economy at every level. They worked as merchants, farmers, craftspeople, entertainers. One archive mentions women boat captains, transporting goods on rivers. Another describes a female overseer managing construction workers. As Sumerian civilization declined, women's status deteriorated. Later Babylonian and Assyrian law codes restricted women's rights significantly. By the first millennium BC, Middle Eastern women had lost most legal independence. Rights Sumerian women took for granted wouldn't return for 3,000 years. Why were Sumerian women relatively free? Perhaps because civilization was new. Social hierarchies hadn't fully solidified. Economic complexity required all available talent. Or perhaps we're seeing the last echoes of prehistoric egalitarianism before patriarchy fully crystallized. The evidence is fragmentary. Most tablets deal with economics, not daily life. We know more about temple prostitutes than ordinary mothers, more about queens than farmers' wives. But what survives shows women as active participants in creating civilization, not just witnesses to it. The Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people, and their land Kien-Gir. But who were they? Where did they come from? After a century of archaeology and linguistics, we still don't know, and that's the most fascinating part of their story. Sumerian is a language isolate. It connects to no other known language, living or dead, not to Akkadian, the Semitic language of their neighbors, not to Elamite, spoken just to their east, not to Indo-European, Dravidian, or any language family. Sumerian stands absolutely alone. This isolation is bizarre. Languages don't emerge from nothing. They evolve from earlier languages, split into dialects, borrow from neighbors. Even isolated languages like Basque show substrate influences from prehistoric tongues. But Sumerian appears in history fully formed, complex, and utterly unique. The structure of Sumerian is unlike anything nearby. It's agglutinative, meaning it builds words by adding suffix after suffix. A single Sumerian verb can contain information that requires an entire sentence in English. Muna ni Indu means, he built it there for him. The Sumerians themselves claim to come from somewhere else. Their mythology speaks of Dilmun, a paradise where the lion kills not, where the wolf snatches not the lamb. Some identify Dilmun with Bahrain in the Persian Gulf. Others think it's purely mythical, but the Sumerians consistently describe themselves as immigrants, not natives. Their earliest art provides clues and raises more questions. Sumerian statues have enormous eyes, bald heads or elaborate hairstyles, and calm expressions. They look nothing like later Mesopotamian art. Some scholars see South Asian influences. Others detect Central Asian features. Archaeological evidence deepens the mystery. The Ubaid period, before the Sumerians, shows continuous development from 5,500 to 3,800 BC. Villages grew gradually. Pottery evolved slowly. Then suddenly, the Uruk period explodes with innovation. Writing appears. Cities emerge. Monumental architecture rises. Mass production begins. It's as if someone pressed fast forward on human development. Were the Sumerians newcomers who brought these innovations? Or did local Ubaid people transform themselves into Sumerians? Physical anthropology offers conflicting evidence. Skeletons from Sumerian graves show diverse populations. Some skulls are long and narrow, dolichocephalic in technical terms. Others are short and broad, brachycephalic. This suggests multiple ethnic groups living together. But which group were the original Sumerians? The long-skulled people appear earlier in the archaeological record. The round-skulled people become more common over time. Did the Sumerians absorb an indigenous population, or were they absorbed by later arrivals? Place names provide tantalizing hints. Many cities and rivers in southern Mesopotamia have non-Sumerian names. The Tigris and Euphrates aren't Sumerian words. Neither are many city names. Uruk, Nippur. These names must come from an earlier language spoken before Sumerian. Linguists call this the substrate language, the ghost tongue that left only place names behind. It seems to have words for rivers, marshes, and reeds, suggesting people adapted to the southern Mesopotamian environment. Were these the true natives, conquered or absorbed by incoming Sumerians? The Sumerian king list adds another layer of mystery. It begins with 8 kings who ruled before the flood, for a total of 241,200 years. These impossibly long reigns suggest deep prehistoric roots. But the first king, Alulim, has a Semitic name, not Sumerian. Several other antediluvian kings also have non-Sumerian names. Were the Sumerians claiming descent from non-Sumerian ancestors, or incorporating the myths of people they conquered? The mixing of names suggests complex ethnic interactions lost to history. Trade goods reveal wide connections from the earliest period. Obsidian from Anatolia appears in the oldest Sumerian sites. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Carnelian from India. These aren't casual contacts. They represent established trade networks spanning thousands of miles. Did the Sumerians arrive via these trade routes? Some scholars propose they came from India, pointing to similarities with the Indus Valley civilization. Both cultures built planned cities with drainage systems. Both used standardized weights and measures. Both traded extensively by sea. But the Indus Valley civilization appeared after Sumerian cities were already ancient. If there's a connection, perhaps it ran the other direction, Sumerians influencing India rather than coming from there. Others look north to Central Asia. The Sumerian word for mountain is Kur. Southern Mesopotamia has no mountains. Did they bring this word from a mountainous homeland? Their temples, artificial mountains called ziggurats, might represent nostalgia for distant peaks. The Sumerian problem, as scholars call it, has spawned wild theories. Some claim the Sumerians were refugees from Atlantis. Others argue they were extraterrestrial visitors. These ideas sell books, but lack evidence. More serious scholars propose multiple waves of migration. Perhaps the Ubaid people were the first wave, arriving around 5,500 BC. The Sumerians proper came later, around 3,500 BC, bringing new technologies. They merged with the existing population, creating the explosive Uruk period. This theory explains the substrate language. It belonged to the Ubaid people. It explains the diverse skeletal types, multiple populations mixing. It explains the sudden innovations, new ideas meeting old knowledge. But it's still speculation. Without written records before 3,200 BC, we're reading shadows on the wall. Every new discovery raises more questions. Recent DNA analysis of ancient skeletons offers hope. Preliminary results show the population of ancient Mesopotamia was already mixed by 3000 BC. Genetic markers point to connections with the Caucasus, Iran, and the Levant, but no clear Sumerian genetic signature emerges. Perhaps that's the answer. There was no pure Sumerian race. The Sumerians might have been a cultural identity rather than an ethnic one. Like Roman or American, Sumerian might have meant anyone who spoke the language and followed the customs. The Sumerians themselves seemed unconcerned with racial purity. They freely borrowed words from Akkadian and other languages. They intermarried with neighboring peoples. They adopted foreign gods into their pantheon. Their mystery deepens their achievement. A people who appear from nowhere, speaking a language from nowhere, create the foundation of all future civilizations. Then they vanish, absorbed by the cultures they influenced, leaving only clay tablets to mark their passage. The search for Sumerian origins continues. New archaeological sites are excavated yearly. Advanced techniques, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, reveal previously hidden information. Someday we might solve the mystery, or perhaps mystery is part of their gift to us, a reminder that human history extends far beyond our ability to recover it. The Sumerians emerged from the unknown and returned to it. But in between, they lit a flame that still burns, Archaeological evidence deepens the mystery. The Ubaid period, before the Sumerians, shows continuous development from 5,500 to 3,800 BC. Villages grew gradually. Pottery evolved slowly. Then suddenly, the Uruk period explodes with innovation. Writing appears. Cities emerge. Monumental architecture rises. Mass production begins. It's as if someone pressed fast forward on human development. Were the Sumerians newcomers who brought these innovations? Or did local Ubaid people transform themselves into Sumerians? Physical anthropology offers conflicting evidence. Skeletons from Sumerian graves show diverse populations. Some skulls are long and narrow, dolichocephalic in technical terms. Others are short and broad, brachycephalic. This suggests multiple ethnic groups living together. But which group were the original Sumerians? The long-skulled people appear earlier in the archaeological record. The round-skulled people become more common over time. Did the Sumerians absorb an indigenous population, or were they absorbed by later arrivals? Place names provide tantalizing hints. Many cities and rivers in southern Mesopotamia have non-Sumerian names. The Tigris and Euphrates aren't Sumerian words. Neither are many city names. Uruk, Nippur. These names must come from an earlier language, spoken before Sumerian. Linguists call this the substrate language, the ghost tongue that left only place names behind. It seems to have words for rivers, marshes, and reeds, suggesting people adapted to the southern Mesopotamian environment. Were these the true natives, conquered or absorbed by incoming Sumerians? The Sumerian king list adds another layer of mystery. It begins with 8 kings who ruled before the flood for a total of 241,200 years. These impossibly long reigns suggest deep prehistoric roots. But the first king, Alulim, has a Semitic name, not Sumerian. Several other antediluvian kings also have non-Sumerian names. Were the Sumerians claiming descent from non-Sumerian ancestors, or incorporating the myths of people they conquered? The mixing of names suggests complex ethnic interactions lost to history. Trade goods reveal wide connections from the earliest period. Obsidian from Anatolia appears in the oldest Sumerian sites. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Carnelian from India. These aren't casual contacts. They represent established trade networks spanning thousands of miles. Did the Sumerians arrive via these trade routes? Some scholars propose they came from India, pointing to similarities with the Indus Valley civilization. Both cultures built planned cities with drainage systems. Both used standardized weights and measures. Both traded extensively by sea. But the Indus Valley civilization appeared after Sumerian cities were already ancient. If there's a connection, perhaps it ran the other direction. Sumerians influencing India rather than coming from there. Others look north to Central Asia. The Sumerian word for mountain is Kur. Southern Mesopotamia has no mountains. Did they bring this word from a mountainous homeland? Their temples, artificial mountains called ziggurats, might represent nostalgia for distant peaks. The Sumerian problem, as scholars call it, has spawned wild theories. Some claim the Sumerians were refugees from Atlantis. Others argue they were extraterrestrial visitors. These ideas sell books, but lack evidence. More serious scholars propose multiple waves of migration. Perhaps the Ubaid people were the first wave, arriving around 5,500 BC. The Sumerians proper came later, around 3,500 BC, bringing new technologies. They merged with the existing population, creating the explosive Uruk period. This theory explains the substrate language. It belonged to the Ubaid people. It explains the diverse skeletal types, multiple populations mixing. It explains the sudden innovations, new ideas meeting old knowledge. But it's still speculation. Without written records before 3,200 BC, we're reading shadows on the wall. Every new discovery raises more questions. Recent DNA analysis of ancient skeletons offers hope. Preliminary results show the population of ancient Mesopotamia was already mixed by 3000 BC. Genetic markers point to connections with the Caucasus, Iran, and the Levant, but no clear Sumerian genetic signature emerges. Perhaps that's the answer. There was no pure Sumerian race. The Sumerians might have been a cultural identity rather than an ethnic one. Like Roman or American, Sumerian might have meant anyone who spoke the language and followed the customs. The Sumerians themselves seemed unconcerned with racial purity. They freely borrowed words from Akkadian and other languages. They intermarried with neighboring peoples. They adopted foreign gods into their pantheon. Their mystery deepens their achievement. A people who appear from nowhere, speaking a language from nowhere, create the foundation of all future civilizations. Then they vanish, absorbed by the cultures they influenced, leaving only clay tablets to mark their passage. The search for Sumerian origins continues. New archaeological sites are excavated yearly. Advanced techniques, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, reveal previously hidden information. Someday we might solve the mystery, or perhaps mystery is part of their gift to us, a reminder that human history extends far beyond our ability to recover it. The Sumerians emerged from the unknown and returned to it, but in between, they lit a flame that still burns. Every time you write a sentence, you use Sumerian technology. Every time you check the time, you use their mathematics. Every time you enter a courthouse, you encounter their concept of written law. The Sumerians didn't just create civilization. They created tools so fundamental we can't imagine life without them. Their influence spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, first to their immediate neighbors, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, then to distant lands, Egypt, India, Greece, eventually to the entire world. The Babylonians inherited Sumerian civilization directly. When Hammurabi created his famous law code around 1750 BC, he based it on earlier Sumerian codes. His scribes wrote in Akkadian, but learned Sumerian in school. For them, Sumerian was what Latin would become for medieval Europe, the language of learning, law, and liturgy. Babylonian priests continued Sumerian religious practices for 2,000 years after Sumerian political power ended. They sang Sumerian hymns, though they needed dictionaries to understand them. They performed Sumerian rituals, though their meaning had evolved. They copied Sumerian texts, preserving them for us. The Epic of Gilgamesh survived because Babylonian scribes loved it. They translated it into Akkadian, expanded it, and spread it across the ancient world. Copies have been found from Turkey to Iran. The story influenced Greek mythology. Hercules' 12 labors echo Gilgamesh's adventures. Biblical connections are even stronger. The Hebrew flood narrative parallels the Sumerian version remarkably. A righteous man warned by a god, a boat carrying representatives of all life, a dove sent to find land, a rainbow covenant after waters recede. The Garden of Eden echoes Sumerian paradise myths. Dilmun, the Sumerian paradise, was a place pure and bright, where the lion kills not. No sickness existed there, no old age. Fresh water flowed abundantly. Like Eden, it was lost to humanity through divine displeasure. The Tower of Babel story seems inspired by Sumerian ziggurats. These massive towers reaching toward heaven alarmed biblical writers. The confusion of languages in the Bible might reflect the multilingual reality of ancient Mesopotamia, where Sumerian, Akkadian, Elamite, and other tongues competed. Abraham, patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, supposedly came from Ur of the Chaldees. If this is the Sumerian Ur, then Abrahamic religions have roots in Sumerian soil. The monotheism he preached might have been a reaction against Sumerian polytheism, a revolutionary simplification of their complex pantheon. Greek civilization, though distant, shows Sumerian influence. Greek mathematics built on Babylonian foundations, which built on Sumerian ones. The Pythagorean theorem was known to Sumerians 1,500 years before Pythagoras. Greek astronomy used Babylonian observations dating back to Sumerian times. The zodiac, which Greeks popularized, originated in Mesopotamia. Sumerians identified constellations and tracked planetary movements. They noticed that planets followed a path through specific stars, what we call the ecliptic. They divided this path into 12 sections, creating the zodiac's foundation. Roman law, basis of Western legal systems, has Mesopotamian roots. The concept of written law codes, legal precedent, and court procedures originated with Sumerians. When Roman jurists declared, "Let justice be done though the heavens fall," they echoed Sumerian ideals of justice carved in stone. Modern archaeology began with the search for Sumerian cities. In the 1840s, European explorers sought biblical sites in Mesopotamia. They found something unexpected: a civilization older than the Bible, older than Greece, older than Egypt's pyramids. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 1850s opened a lost world. Suddenly, tablets that had been curiosities became voices from the dawn of history. Scholars could read Sumerian contracts, letters, poems, prayers. The dead civilization began to speak. What they said revolutionized our understanding of human development. The Sumerians showed that civilization wasn't a Greek invention or divine gift. It was a human creation, built gradually through innovation and effort. They proved that progress was possible, that humans could reshape their world. Modern Iraq preserves Sumerian heritage despite decades of conflict. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad houses hundreds of thousands of Sumerian artifacts. Iraqi archaeologists continue excavations when security permits. Local communities near ancient sites maintain oral traditions about the buried cities. The marsh Arabs of southern Iraq might be the Sumerians' most direct descendants. They live in the same marshlands, build reed houses like those in Sumerian reliefs, and use boats identical to those in 5,000-year-old art. Their lifestyle preserves echoes of Sumerian daily life. But modern development threatens these connections. Dam construction has reduced water flow to the marshes. Climate change brings longer droughts. War has scattered traditional communities. The landscape that created Sumerian civilization is disappearing. Digital technology offers new hope for preservation. Hundreds of thousands of tablets have been photographed and uploaded online. Machine learning helps decipher damaged texts. Virtual reconstructions let us walk through Sumerian cities as they might have appeared. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative has catalogued over 500,000 tablets. Scholars worldwide can study texts without handling fragile originals. Amateur enthusiasts can learn to read cuneiform online. The Sumerian language, dead for 4,000 years, is taught in universities on every continent. New discoveries continue. Satellite imagery reveals ancient canal systems invisible from the ground. Ground-penetrating radar finds buried structures without excavation. Each year brings new tablets, new insights, new questions. Recent finds have been spectacular. A library discovered in northern Iraq contained previously unknown Sumerian literary works. Tablets found in private collections revealed new details about Sumerian medicine. Archaeological surveys suggest entire Sumerian cities remain undiscovered. The Sumerians matter because they show us ourselves. Their struggles, with nature, with each other, with meaning, are ours. They faced floods and droughts, war and peace, love and loss. They asked the same questions we ask. Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we live? Their answers differed from ours, but their questioning was identical. They created gods to explain the inexplicable. They built cities to transcend individual mortality. They invented writing to speak across time. The Sumerians gave us civilization's tools, but more importantly, they gave us permission to use them. They showed that humans could create their own destiny, that we could build something greater than ourselves, that we could leave a mark that time couldn't erase. Every tablet they pressed, every canal they dug, every prayer they whispered was an act of faith. Faith that tomorrow would come, that children would remember, that effort mattered. They were right. 5,000 years later, we still read their words, use their inventions, wrestle with their questions. The Sumerians are gone, but they're also everywhere. How did the Sumerians think? Not what they thought. We have their writings for that. But how their minds worked. What was it like to be human 5,000 years ago, in the world's first cities, inventing civilization as you went? Their language offers clues. Sumerian had no word for history. They lived in an eternal present where past and future merged with now. They had multiple words for different types of silence, but no single word for silence itself. They distinguished between dozens of types of sheep, but had no generic word for animal. This specificity reveals a concrete mindset. Sumerians thought in particular rather than abstracts. They didn't conceptualize justice. They knew specific just acts. They didn't theorize about beauty. They recognized beautiful objects. Their mathematics worked the same way. They solved complex problems without abstract notation. Instead of algebra's X and Y, they used concrete scenarios. A field has this length and this width. What is its area? Every mathematical concept tied to physical reality. Time consciousness differed radically from ours. Sumerians experienced time cyclically, not linearly. Years didn't accumulate towards some future goal. They repeated eternal patterns. Spring always followed winter. Floods always returned. The dead became the living who became the dead. This cyclical thinking shaped their mythology. Gods died and returned. Kings lost power and regained it. Chaos threatened order, but order always restored itself. Until next time. Dreams held special significance. Sumerians believed dreams were messages from gods or glimpses of the future. Kings postponed battles because of troubling dreams. Merchants cancelled journeys after nightmares. Dream interpretation was a respected profession requiring years of training. One dream manual survives, listing dreams and their meanings. If a man dreams he flies like a bird, he will lose all he possesses. If he dreams he eats crow meat, he will have income. If he dreams his teeth fall out, a family member will die. These interpretations follow dream logic rather than rational analysis. Flying means loss because birds own nothing. Eating crow brings income because crows steal shiny objects. Losing teeth means losing family because both involve pieces of yourself disappearing. Sumerians lived in a world where everything had meaning. A dog crossing your path, a particular cloud formation, the sound of wind through reeds, all carried messages for those who could read them. This wasn't superstition, but sophisticated pattern recognition. They observed correlations we'd dismiss as coincidence. If earthquakes followed eclipses often enough, they assumed connection. If certain bird flights preceded successful harvests, they watched for those birds. Without scientific method to test causation, correlation became causation. Memory worked differently without widespread literacy. Most Sumerians couldn't read or write. They preserved information through repetition, rhythm, and narrative. Important facts became proverbs. Historical events became myths. Legal precedents became stories. Sumerian proverbs reveal practical wisdom. Build like a lord, live like a slave. Pleasure is beer, discomfort is travel. A sweet word is everybody's friend. He who possesses much silver may be happy, but he who possesses nothing at all can sleep. Humor existed, often dark. One tablet preserves ancient jokes. A dog walked into a tavern and said, "I can't see anything." The tavern keeper said, "I'll open one for you." The humor relies on wordplay. Open meant both opening eyes and opening doors. Another joke. Something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. Bathroom humor, apparently, is as old as civilization. Privacy, as we understand it, didn't exist. Houses had few rooms. Walls were thin. Extended families lived together. Everyone knew everyone's business. Individual identity merged with family and profession. Names reflected this collective identity. People were called son of their father or man of their profession. Personal names often honored gods. Enlil gives life, or beloved of Inanna. Your name proclaimed your place in cosmic and social order. Death consciousness permeated life. Sumerians knew death was final. No heaven awaited. No reincarnation offered hope. The underworld was universal destination, a place of dust and shadows. This knowledge made life precious, but also melancholic. A Sumerian poem captures this mood. No one can see death. No one can hear death. Yet death is more powerful than life. The strong man cannot escape death. The wise man cannot avoid it. But Sumerians weren't paralyzed by death's inevitability. They responded with fierce creativity. If individual life was brief, they'd build cities that lasted. If memory faded, they'd invent writing. If bodies died, names could achieve immortality. Work gave life meaning. Sumerians valued industriousness above almost everything. Lazy people were scorned. Their proverbs constantly emphasized diligence. He who works with his hands feeds himself. The idle man eats his own flesh. This work ethic wasn't mere survival necessity. Work connected humans to gods. Remember, humans were created to work for gods. Labor was literally humanity's purpose. To work well was to fulfill divine intention. Community mattered more than individuality. Sumerian texts rarely express personal feelings or individual desires. Even personal letters focus on practical matters rather than emotions. The self existed primarily as part of larger wholes: family, profession, city, cosmos. Yet individuals did stand out. We know names of specific scribes, merchants, priestesses. Some left personal marks on their work. A scribe adding "written quickly" to excuse poor handwriting, a student doodling in tablet margins. Sumerians experienced wonder. Their texts express awe at natural phenomena, the regular movement of planets, the power of floods, the mystery of birth. They asked fundamental questions. Why does the sun rise? Where does wind come from? What makes seeds grow? Their answers involved gods and myths rather than physics and biology. But the questioning impulse was scientific. They observed, recorded, looked for patterns. They just interpreted patterns through religious rather than materialist frameworks. Love existed, though expressed differently than modern romance. Sacred marriage hymns contain erotic poetry. Your mouth is honey, your body is sweet. Lion, let me give you my caresses. But most marriages were economic arrangements. Love might develop, but it wasn't expected. Children were valued practically and emotionally. They provided labor and old age security. But texts also reveal parental affection. Lullabies survive. Sleep come, sleep come, sleep come to my son. Sleep hasten to my son. The Sumerian mind was simultaneously alien and familiar. They thought in ways we can barely imagine, seeing gods in rivers, reading omens in sheep livers, experiencing time as cycles. Yet they worried about the same things we do: paying debts, raising children, finding meaning. Perhaps that's their greatest gift to us, proof that human nature transcends cultural difference. 5,000 years and everything has changed, except the human heart. Civilizations die differently than people. People end suddenly. A final breath, then silence. Civilizations fade slowly, their endings visible only in retrospect. The Sumerian civilization didn't collapse dramatically. It dissolved gradually into its successors, like salt dissolving in water. By 2000 BC, Sumerian was already a dead language. People still wrote it, priests still chanted it, but children no longer learned it at their mother's knees. Akkadian had become the spoken tongue. Sumerian survived only in schools and temples, preserved but not living. The final blow came from an unexpected direction, not invasion or rebellion, but salt. Thousands of years of irrigation had poisoned the soil. Each flood brought fresh silt, but also dissolved minerals. As water evaporated, salt accumulated. Crop yields began declining around 2100 BC. Wheat, which doesn't tolerate salt, failed first. Farmers switched to barley, which handles salt better. But eventually, even barley struggled. Fields that once fed cities became barren wasteland. The Sumerians understood what was happening. Tablets discussed the white fields, salt-crusted land where nothing grew. They tried solutions: crop rotation, fallow periods, canal flushing, but they couldn't reverse decades of accumulation. Climate change compounded the crisis. Around 2200 BC, a severe drought struck the entire Middle East. Archaeological evidence, soil samples, tree rings, lake sediments. confirms reduced rainfall lasting centuries. Rivers ran low, harvests failed, cities starved. Political fragmentation accelerated decline. After Ur fell around 2000 BC, no single power controlled Mesopotamia. City-states fought constantly. Wars destroyed irrigation systems that required regional cooperation. Canals silted up. Maintenance stopped. The infrastructure of civilization crumbled. New peoples moved into Mesopotamia. Amorites from the western deserts established kingdoms. Hurrians descended from the north. Kassites arrived from the Zagros Mountains. These groups absorbed Sumerian culture but brought their own languages, gods, and customs. The Sumerians didn't disappear. They were absorbed. Intermarriage blurred ethnic boundaries. Children grew up bilingual, then monolingual in Akkadian. Within a few generations, Sumerian became a learned identity rather than an ethnic one. Cities tell the story of decline. Ur, once housing 60,000 people, shrank to a few thousand. Uruk's great walls enclosed empty neighborhoods. Eridu, the first city, was completely abandoned by 1500 BC. Sand dunes buried temples where thousands once worshipped. Lamentations written during this period capture the anguish. The gods have abandoned their temples. The goddesses have left their shrines. Ur is destroyed, its people scattered. The storm swept over the land. These weren't metaphorical storms. Dust storms increased as agricultural land turned to desert. Texts describe evil winds that darkened the sun and made breathing difficult. Modern analysis suggests massive dust storms caused by drought and land degradation. Economic collapse followed agricultural failure. Trade networks that connected India to the Mediterranean fragmented. Merchants couldn't travel safely. Cities couldn't pay for imports. The complex economy simplified drastically. Writing became less common. The millions of tablets from the Ur Third period dwindled to thousands, then hundreds. Literacy, never widespread, became even rarer. Schools closed. Scribal traditions broke. Yet Sumerian culture persisted in transformed ways. Babylon rose to prominence around 1800 BC under Hammurabi. Though Amorite in origin, Babylonian culture was thoroughly Sumerianized. They worshipped Sumerian gods under Akkadian names. They copied Sumerian texts. They claimed to restore Sumerian greatness. The last native speaker of Sumerian probably died around 1750 BC. We don't know who they were. Perhaps an elderly priest in some forgotten temple. Perhaps a grandmother in a remote village. With their death, a language that had been spoken for 2,000 years fell silent. But Sumerian refused to die completely. For another 2,000 years, until the time of Christ, priests and scholars studied it. Kings commissioned Sumerian inscriptions they couldn't read. Students copied Sumerian proverbs they half understood. Why this persistence? Sumerian had become sacred, the language of ancient wisdom, divine revelation, and cultural origin. To know Sumerian was to touch the beginning of things. Even incompletely understood, it carried power. The last cuneiform text was written in 75 AD, an astronomical observation in Babylon. After that, silence. The writing system that began with counting sheep ended with counting stars. For 17 centuries, Sumerian civilization was completely forgotten. Their cities became shapeless mounds called tells. Their tablets, when found by farmers, were discarded or ground up for medicine. Their language was extinct beyond memory. Local legends preserved fragments. Arabs called one mound Tel al-Mukayyar, the mound of pitch, because of bitumen-covered bricks. They didn't know it was Ur. Another mound was Warka, a corruption of Uruk. The Sumerians might have remained forgotten forever, but in the 1840s, European archaeologists began excavating Mesopotamian mounds. They expected to find biblical cities. Instead, they found something older, a civilization that predated the Bible's earliest stories. The rediscovery revolutionized human self-understanding. The Sumerians proved that complex civilization was older than anyone imagined. They showed that progress wasn't linear. Civilizations could rise, flourish, and vanish completely. Environmental degradation played a crucial role in their decline. The same irrigation that created their civilization ultimately destroyed it. This lesson resonates today as we face our own environmental challenges. The Sumerians couldn't reverse salinization. Can we reverse climate change? Their fall wasn't sudden or dramatic. No volcanic eruption like Pompeii, no conquest like the Aztecs. Just slow decline, harvests shrinking, populations dwindling, traditions fading, a civilization dying of exhaustion. Yet in dying, they achieved immortality. Every subsequent Mesopotamian civilization preserved Sumerian elements. Babylonians and Assyrians were cultural Sumerians who spoke different languages. Persian and Greek scholars studied Sumerian achievements. Islamic mathematicians built on Sumerian foundations. The gods didn't abandon their cities. They transformed them. Sumerian Inanna became Babylonian Ishtar, then Greek Aphrodite, then Roman Venus. Sumerian flood stories became the biblical deluge. Sumerian law codes became the foundation of Western justice. The Sumerians teach us that endings aren't always endings. Sometimes they're transformations. A civilization can die and still shape the future. Ideas outlive empires. Inventions outlast inventors. They created civilization and watched it crumble. They invented writing and were forgotten. They built the first cities and saw them buried in sand. But 5,000 years later, we still live in the world they made. 5,000 years ago, in the land between two rivers, humans did something unprecedented. They gathered in groups larger than kinship. They built structures taller than necessity. They created systems more complex than survival required. They invented civilization, and us. The Sumerians were the first to face questions that still define humanity. How do thousands of strangers live together peacefully? How do we balance individual desires with collective needs? How do we preserve knowledge across generations? How do we find meaning in brief lives? Their answers weren't perfect. They created inequality along with organization, war along with law, environmental destruction along with agricultural abundance. But they showed it was possible to build something greater than the sum of human parts. When we write, we use their invention. When we measure time in 60-minute hours, we follow their system. When we seek justice through written law, we build on their foundation. When we gather in cities, we inhabit their dream. The Sumerians remind us that nothing is permanent, not cities, not empires, not even languages. But impermanence doesn't mean meaninglessness. They existed for 2,000 years and influenced the next 5,000. Their clay tablets outlasted their temples. Their ideas outlived their gods. Modern Iraq, built on Sumerian foundations, struggles with war, climate change, and political instability. The Tigris and Euphrates run low, threatened by upstream dams and reduced rainfall. The marshes where civilization began have nearly disappeared. Ancient sites suffer from looting and neglect, yet the legacy endures. Every time an Iraqi child learns to write, they continue a tradition 5,000 years old. Every time archaeologists uncover another tablet, voices silenced for thousands of years speak again. Every time scholars decipher another text, human understanding deepens. The Sumerians gave us a gift we're still unwrapping. 500,000 tablets have been excavated. Only a fraction have been translated. Millions more remain buried. Each one potentially contains revelations about our shared beginning. They would recognize our world. Cities growing beyond sustainability. Technology advancing faster than wisdom. Environmental degradation threatening civilization. The struggle between order and chaos. The search for meaning in an uncertain cosmos. They would also recognize our solutions. Law to mediate conflict. Writing to preserve knowledge, trade to share resources, education to transmit culture, cooperation to achieve the impossible. The Sumerians weren't fundamentally different from us. They worried about their children's education. They complained about taxes and lazy workers. They fell in love inappropriately. They struggled with debt. They wondered what happened after death. Reading their words collapses 5,000 years into nothing. A mother's letter to her son, a merchant's complaint about copper quality, a student's homework complete with errors, a lover's poem, a worker's receipt for daily rations. These aren't ancient artifacts. They're human moments, frozen in clay. The Sumerians called themselves the black-headed people. We still don't know why. We don't know where they came from or where they went. But we know what they did in between. They lit the flame of civilization and passed it on. That flame still burns. In every classroom where children learn to write. In every courtroom where justice is sought. In every laboratory where knowledge advances. In every city where strangers become neighbors. The Sumerians didn't know they were changing the world. They were just solving problems. How to count sheep, how to distribute grain, how to remember debts. But in solving their problems, they solved ours. They created tools we still use, ideas we still think, dreams we still dream. 5,000 years from now, what will remain of us? Our cities may crumble like theirs. Our languages may fall silent. Our names may be forgotten. But if we're lucky, if we're very lucky, our contributions will persist, woven so deeply into human culture that no one remembers their origin. That's the Sumerian achievement. Not monuments of stone, but monuments of thought. Not immortality of body, but immortality of influence. They disappeared so completely that we forgot they existed. Yet we live every day in the world they created. The land between the rivers is quiet now. Wind blows sand over buried cities. Reeds grow where temples stood. But beneath the sand, millions of tablets wait. Each one a voice from the dawn of history. Each one a reminder. We were here. We built this. We started something. Now it's your turn.